Hi, and welcome to Module 2, Queer World Making that Centers Social and Ecological Justice. To rally behind Peasant Futurisms, we must not only define what it stands for, but also, I think, what it's fighting against. The climate crisis is a social and an ecological phenomenon rooted in industrial modernity, and as Jason Moore explains, eco-social violence is a function of global capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system founded on two principles: exploitation of workers who are flattened into cheap labor, and extractivism, which is a process that commodifies ecological milieus and reduces them into quote-unquote natural resources. Capitalism maximizes profits and minimizes costs by exploiting workers, extracting raw materials from the earth, often through land theft, pillaging, and violence, which are all the definition of colonialism, and creating economies of scale while constantly developing new markets for its goods and services. So just to slow down, when you make more of something and its cost per unit decreases, that's called economies of scale. So for example, if I were to produce 10 of these pens, it might cost me, maybe $90 to produce 10 of them. But if I produce 10 million of them, it might cost me 50 cents. So now all of a sudden, instead of producing, 5,000 pens and selling them at $20 each, I now have to find, 10 million people to buy them at $5 so I can have $4.50 of profit. So I hope that made sense. And developing markets really is about finding, as I said, more buyers for the large quantities of stuff that has been produced through these economies of scale. Stuff that you might or might not need. Stuff that may or may not be of quality. Stuff that is planned for obsolescence and generates enormous waste networks on a planet that's already dangerously heating up. At its height, capitalism monopolizes and matures into what is called imperialism. Monopoly capitalism means that small and medium-sized businesses, often local businesses, are edged out by competition that is much bigger than them and, ceases to exist through buyouts and mergers until there is actually little to no competition left. This is why we call it monopoly capitalism. As local family businesses grow into transnational corporations, they start to capture governments within and beyond their country borders, always with the aim of securing profits through exploitation and extractivism, hurting vulnerable people and ecological milieus across the planet. And if you're interested in the definition of certain words as I read, including words like capturing governments or governance capture, go check out the text version of Module 2, and you will find a definition of terms that might not be as easily accessible. So we've said that capitalism exploits people, extracts natural resources, and deanimates other than human beings. We've said that, it kind of grows from small businesses into these enormous corporate monopolies that then look for markets across the planet and capture governments, within their own countries and beyond, and cause a great deal of eco-social violence. Now, obviously, this has been going on for quite a while. So as market disputes between imperial powers create tension, these often erupt in wars, killing innocent people and blasting natural landscapes. So it's not just that, we have a kind of slow violence that erodes our social and ecological fabric. These market tensions can erupt in sudden, intense violences like wars. Globalization has not turned the world into a village, as the saying goes. Instead, it has obliterated village mentalities, grounded in peasant values and practices, and colonize the world in our imaginations, making us dependent on transnational corporations to meet our basic needs, including our needs for shelter and food. It has monopolized how we work, learn, play, and socialize through what I call the compulsory digitization of life, defined in more detail in a later module. Peasant futurism is an attempt to arrest these cycles of ecological and social violence by turning over the means and ownership of production back to workers within radically local cyclical economies that are self-sustainable and regenerative. We must be careful, however, not to reproduce classed and racialized whiteness in our future world-making projects. The truth about peasant communities is that they're often quite homogeneous. My paternal and maternal Bosniak peasant grandparents came from very geographically, culturally, and climatically different areas of ex-Yugoslavia. So while at local levels, peasant villages are quite homogeneous, on regional, continental, and even planetary levels, peasantry is also extraordinarily heterogeneous. The way that Chinese peasants live, organize their villages, and grow food might not be the same as peasants coming from Nigeria or Bosnia, for example. Sameness and difference thus characterize peasant ways of living, offering cues for how to imagine peasant futurisms within queer and post-human eco-city landscapes. Politics of difference and inclusivity are essential to this future world-building project that asks important questions like, how do we create more peasant, pleasant futures that honors our biodiverse ecological milieus and unites heterogeneous communities of people, especially in urban areas? Futures are always in contact with shadows of the past, swimming in the waters of our living present, which is why we must attend to and honor vastly different histories of privilege and dispossession. If future world-making projects are to be pleasant for all, they must accommodate a variety of different cultures, values, and belief systems, and must be flexible and generous enough to meet a diversity of needs and desires. If the kings and queens thought of themselves as exceptional, divinely appointed, and therefore superior to all other creatures on earth, masters with a apparently God-given right to subjugate, enslave, and kill others, peasants have always known that their survival depended on the eco-social arts of mutual aid, solidarity, and collaboration between humans and their ecological milieus. And by the way, that includes living soil, forests, plants, bodies of water, farm animals, pollinators, insects, other insects, climate, and the seasons. Peasant futurisms does not advocate for a return to medieval peasantry, nor does it romanticize peasant traditions. My grandmothers lived under very strict gender norms, forced to bear children until a son was born. Bosniak peasants lived in patrilineal villages that delineated everybody's sexual lives under very strict cis-heteronormative norms. But as Joan Roughgarden reminds us, we live on a very queer planet with a diversity of gender and sexual expressions, as well as a variety of ways of raising family and living in community across and within species lines. Humans are no different than countless other queer creatures we coexist with on an incredibly pluralistic, even if damaged, planet. The future must not only embrace but also liberate queerness, break binaries, and embrace the exuberance and joy of diversity, fluidity, and change. As Jose Munoz reminds us, queerness is primarily about futurity and hope. That is to say that queerness is always on the horizon. There is room for plurality and diversity, even in our hopes for more livable futures. As a dream that centers land matters, peasant futurisms risks reproducing settler colonialism on stolen and unsurrendered indigenous, Inuit, and Métis land on Turtle Island, what is today known as North America. That is why its success depends on our ability to embrace relationships of care, grounded in mutual aid and solidarity with other world-making projects, including indigenous futurisms and Afrofuturisms. In my introductory video, I've offered some examples of that already happening across the planet. Unless it is socially and ecologically just, the future is not worth fighting for, at least not for me. Unless it is healing and life-giving, it will not be livable. I invite you to listen to Gifts of the Land, a guided tour by Robin Wall Kimmerer, to learn how to reorient your relationship with land and relate to this lively and animate member of our world in more reciprocal terms. I then invite you to hear D. Denenje Dust Akpem explain Afrofuturism beyond sci-fi. I hope you've enjoyed this module and that it provokes some interesting conversation among your social circle.